The things that are certain is God's realness and his love for us, for all of us, which, sometimes we want to be loved more than others. And I feel like the things that are certain are hard. They're hard to put into propositional statements, and they're hard to live. It's a real challenge to love others the way that God loves them, to look for Christ in the faces of others, to find our own face instead of the mask that we've been kind of hustling of the person that we want to present to others and that we think maybe we're supposed to be.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Broken to Beloved podcast. If you're looking for compassionate conversations that provide practical resources to move toward healing and wholeness, then this is the place for you. Today, we're talking with Aimee Byrd about her new book, Saving Face. Aimee is an author, speaker, blogger, podcaster, and former coffee shop owner, which is close to my heart, and the author of 8 different books, including The Hope in Our Scars and Recovering from Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. Her articles have appeared all over the place, and she's been interviewed and quoted in Christianity Today and The Atlantic. We have a fascinating conversation about what it means to see and save our own faces, reflected to us and back to us, and can't wait for you to hear it. So here's my conversation with our new friend, Aimee. Aimee, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Brian. It's great to talk to you again.
I'm excited to talk about your book, Saving Face. It was fascinating.
Oh, thank you. It's kind of different writing for me.
Well, that's what I was going to say first. It's like, based on all the other stuff that you have, whether it's your books or your articles or your Substack and all these things, how did this one feel? Because it does read very different, I feel like, from your other material.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot more meditative and contemplative and creative. And it felt really good to write, I have to say. I enjoyed writing this book, and I was very eager for it to release, and come together. And it even has this wonderful, spooky, creative cover to it
I wanted to ask about that too.
Yeah, we hired an artist, Wayne Brzezinka, out of Nashville. And so he did like a 3D model first. He is amazing.
Wow.
But I loved working with him. He really captured, I think, the mystery that I wanted to be on the cover. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just really proud of this book in a lot of different ways. It's less sure. Like I feel less certain about what I'm saying these days than I did before. And yet that's where I'm happy to be. So I love that I get to share more creatively with that. And just from this stage of my life, being middle-aged and also having gone through some pretty serious disillusionment with the church. However, it's so easy when you are a victim of spiritual abuse to see that the good guys and the bad guys defined so clearly, right? And to be this victim and to be like, oh, tisk, tisk, if these people would ever repent. But I really felt like this was also a time for me to do some inner work on my own self. What led me into this denomination with these people? What was it that made me feel so certain with some of my, more doctrinal parts of my, my belief, and the precision that I thought I had theologically, which affects things even like your parenting and your friendships and your marriage.
Absolutely does,
and even how you view the way you were raised and all those things. So I do some major digging in this book, and so it was also healing to write.
Yeah. I think I picked up a lot of that. One of the values that we talk about a lot here is curiosity over certainty.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of that letting go of the certainty. And like you're saying, the doctrinal positions and all these other things, one of our other values is kind of people over position. That like I would rather walk with someone and get to know their story rather than just defend a doctrine that I'm used to talking about or hearing or learning, whatever it is. And there's so much of that going throughout the book that I found really helpful. I think other people might find it confusing or that they would get lost in it. For me, it was actually very reassuring that there are people out there who are doing this really hard, complicated work, that there is so little black and white left.
Yes.
I think. And it's for the people, for me, who are willing to get into the gray and to the messiness of it that I really value. So
well, and it seems like the things that are certain is God's realness and his love for us, for all of us, which, sometimes we want to be loved more than others. And I feel like the things that are certain are hard.
Yeah.
They're hard to put into propositional statements, and they're hard to live. It's a real challenge to love others the way that God loves them, to look for Christ in the faces of others, to find our own face instead of the mask that we've been kind of hustling of the person that we want to present to others and that we think maybe we're supposed to be.
And I want to chase that phrase in a second. But for people who may be unfamiliar with you or your work, would you give us kind of the short version of whatever you would like to share with us?
Yeah. So Saving Face is my 8th book, actually. And my writing has kind of been what I would call like the Bildungsroman to get to this book. I began writing when my children were really little, and I found myself lonely as a thinking woman in the church with like theological vigor. I wanted to be able to talk about all these things that I saw the men talking about. And I was, going to these women's groups, and they were much more fluffy. Our books were, even I was discovering, full of error and not much meaningfulness for me. So I began writing out of that loneliness. That's how I became an author, is that I wanted to write into this void for women's ministries in the church. I was in a conservative Presbyterian denomination, the PCA at the time. So I wanted to kind of motivate women that, hey, it's important for us to learn theology too. All theology is like who God is, and that affects the way we live our lives. And it's actually quite beautiful to learn more about who God is. For me, it helped me come alive, out of this mundane life of changing diapers and, running to preschool and all those things. They're beautiful, but they can become very mundane over and over and over again. And lo and behold, I got my first book published and started getting asked to do speaking engagements and to co-host on a podcast. And for years, I just kept on writing and speaking. And in that, it was like the onion peeling. I'm finding more and more issues with women in the church. And it wasn't just me. In my traveling and speaking all over the place, women are telling me the same longing that they're having and the same fear that, if they speak into it too much with the church leadership and, quote unquote, complementarian churches, that they are looked at as a troublemaker, someone who's trying to usurp authority above the men, things like that. So I began writing more into this topic of the relationships between men and women in the church as brothers and sisters, about what discipleship and spiritual formation looks like in the church, about resources for women's ministries. And at first, people were like, yeah, this is great. And then as I really poked the complementarian bear and wrote more into like very damaging teaching within what's quote unquote biblical manhood and womanhood, then they came after me with the pitchforks. And I'm not exaggerating. There were groups formed online of leaders in my denomination at the time was the OPC, as well as, other Presbyterian denominations, Baptists, Anglicans, who are very unhappy with my writing and that people were reading it,
Right.
When I published Recovering from Biblical Manhood and Womanhood in 2020. And so the next thing I find out that this massive group of church leaders, some of them I knew, some of them I was kind of collaborated with on things, were calling me things like Jezebel and the great whore of Babylon. And they were plotting to sabotage my Amazon page. They were calling ahead of my speaking engagements, saying, beware, she's a danger to your family. And they used language like guard thy loins.
Oh, good.
It's just strange, very authoritative, archaic language. They were like digging up pictures on my Facebook of like when I took my daughter out to lunch on a Sunday and wanted to, they repost the picture and wanted to like press ecclesial charges against me for breaking the Sabbath. Strange stuff. But I found out even one of my elders was in that group. So my own elders in my church, who I thought I was friends with. And it was really quite devastating to see. I will say another part of my personality I've had to really work on is that I want people to like me. And so to see that was devastating. I got let go of my co-hosting at the podcast and blogging over there with the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. I lost many friends, and I was blacklisted from all the places that I was speaking. And it was so bizarre to me. There were plenty of people in my denomination, leaders, saying, oh, this is terrible. This is so immature. The name calling, like if they have a real problem with your work, they can address that, obviously, is what I was saying. And they were just really harassing me like crazy and publicly. And so they wanted to do something about it. And they encouraged me to use the proper church order to address this problem.
Right.
No, I mean, the Book of Church Order, Aimee, we've got this all laid out. This will be no problem. And Brian, for 2 years, I tried to do that and take it up the, hierarchy of Presbyterianism to, from the session of elders to the regional presbytery to the Grand Assembly poobah. And each step of the process was worse and just more traumatizing. I was in, a presbytery meeting with all these leaders where I was being mocked and laughed at and misrepresented, and I had no voice. The whole time I had no voice. The pen was taken from me. Other people were writing my story for me. I really had to do some soul searching, and even of like why I stuck in there so long, because I kept thinking these people are reasonable people. Like this can't possibly be acceptable behavior. That's, I think, the biggest form of disillusionment in it all was the complete lack of maturity in leadership, emotional maturity, spiritual maturity. And so that made me really have to reevaluate that whole system of church government, of theology even, that I was in, that kind of promoted the idea that sanctification or spiritual growth came from theological knowledge.
Yes. Well, and you outlined so much of that bit in the book, and I'm just so sorry for the years that you lost like in those processes. And you tell a good part of that story where you end up in a trailer of all places with a couple of folding chairs, just having to sit and listen, you and your husband, to them talk about that lady while you're literally sitting there in the room.
Yeah, that's what they called me, that lady.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry.
So dehumanizing.
And yet to hear you retell that story just now and to see the amount of work that you really do in this book and share on full display for the rest of us to read and absorb.
Right.
I mean, it's beyond pretty vulnerable. I mean, I was recently in a group with one of Kurt Thompson's confessional communities.
Okay, yeah.
And, in that process, a storyteller gets to share their story for 20 minutes. And then we just reflect back to them how it affected us emotionally. We're not there to solve problems or fix anything. But what you're allowed to do is say, well, it felt to me, or your story made me feel. And there's a whole liturgy that we follow in terms of responding how our stories shape us and each other.
Yes.
And I remember in one of the stories that was shared, how incredibly vulnerable it was. And it's also built obviously around this whole idea of rupture and repair, that life is going to be full of ruptures, but how do we move towards repair?
Right.
And even possibly rupture intentionally so we can move to a deeper repair and a deeper intimacy with people. And I remember a comment being made in response to one person's story of like, it was just so vulnerable. And I don't mean for this to be vulgar, but it felt like you were undressing yourself in front of us. Like that's how vulnerable you were. And Aimee, I feel like that's what you're doing with this book.
I know. I am.
You really are. That. I mean, you really get into it. So why, I'm curious, because people have all kinds of responses to abuse. And people have all kinds of responses to difficulty or hardship in their life. And somehow you have been driven to do your own work and look in the mirror. We'll talk a lot about mirrors.
Yes.
Till you can see your own face so that you can see the faces of others. How did you get there from all the stuff you've experienced?
Well, I think part of how I got there really is from kind of getting to the rock bottom, spiritually feeling alone, without a church and so disillusioned. And then, you're talking about repair. Well, there's so many pieces of repair that I don't get to have, that I long for. But then there's also the ways that I feel like Christ met me there in the pit, and through others as well, and through his word. The Song of Songs really ministered deeply to me, and still does. The thing about the Song of Songs is it isn't this book in the Bible full of, propositional statements of theology. It's allegory. It's full of metaphor. It's poetry. It's song. It stirs up our longings, though. It does something that doctrinal statements cannot do. And it made me realize that I was only looking at the outside of things in so many ways, and that we really have to be made ready for reality, to be made ready for truth. It's like we're going truth searching. And I think in my youth, that's what I wanted so bad. Like I wanted to get it right so that I could be the right wife, marry the right person, raise my kids the right way, And in that process of trying to do that, I realized that I lost so much of the things that the old me really valued and treasured, and it's more than a moral matter. Christianity is more than a moral matter. It's a mystical one. And that's what I was really learning through the Song of Songs, through my friendships that stuck around and how much deeper they got. Doing things like hiking and just pouring our souls out, in the woods. It was like a ritual almost. And then journaling was a huge part that led me to write this book, I think, because I was learning to tell my own secrets in my journal and say the things on paper that maybe I was afraid to voice out loud to God before, and to be honest about my level of grief and loneliness and longing. And I share some excerpts of that in the book. And I love Kurt Thompson's work, as you're sharing, and this whole idea of memory work. And so I began many of my chapters, and they're much smaller chapters this time than my normal writing. And I began a lot of them with little pieces of memory that I had growing up, and just trying to find my face, trying to find who this Aimee is after all of this. And a lot of it was by looking into my childhood. So it's interesting because what you're saying in these confessional communities, when a story is told and then people react or respond by saying, how that provoked them and how they felt, you can go back to your own memories and do that too, right? This feeling that you still have, why am I carrying this feeling? Why do I remember it like this? Why is this the memory that is still stuck in me? And so I do a lot of that kind of work, and I found it very helpful. But I think sharing it with others is just as important. It kind of serves in a similar way to the confessional communities, because when people read something so vulnerable like that, I think it provokes their own memories, their own stories. Our stories are all woven together. They really are. And I think that's what shows us God in so many ways too, is to see how that happens, because we're each unique people with unique stories, and yet we provoke one another's. And it's those kind of things that I think God really uses in our spiritual growth as well.
And I also caught, in addition to the memory work, I'm learning a lot about story work.
Yes.
Like Adam Young and Dan Allender talk about. There was so much of that, especially as you talk about learning to recognize our desires and being able to go back and bless those desires, even when they've ended in chaos or destruction for us because of what happened to us in our lives, or because of the stories of our parents and what they brought into our lives and our families. And just, there was so much of that good, deep work, Aimee, that you're doing of mining these stories and mining these memories. And again, being so vulnerable to share them with us. And I recognize the work that's being done there. And I'll be really curious a year from now, 2 years from now, how you're feeling after this book's been out and you start to see the reflections coming back to you from other faces, and just even your experience of having let it go. This could have very well have just been a personal entry for you to do the work yourself. So maybe that's just the question, is having given this to the rest of us, what are you hoping we will see?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Brian, because it's hard for me to I don't want to get my hopes up, and envision.
Sure.
It's almost experimental in some ways for me, because my longing is really for people to do reading groups with this, because I do think it would provoke a lot of conversation that could be very edifying and relationship building, and a lot of maybe provoke conversations about God and his love for us and the way he loves us and what story we're telling ourselves about who we are, about who God is, and what he wants from us. I think it can be shocking in some ways like that, especially I think for people who are maybe mid-30s and older, who've lived a little bit more of life and can be a little more humble about these things. It takes there are mature people younger than that, but just to have that life experience sometimes, what it is, you can spend, like Carl Jung talks about how we spend like the first half of adulthood building this persona of who we think we're supposed to be and building, all the things of how we think we're supposed to be adulting. And the second half is more of getting into the shadow work of the things that we've stuffed down that we thought that weren't good about us, that we thought that others found to be ugly, and to be able to integrate our whole self then, with our longings and our desires and our emotions, and be able to be more whole and acquainted with our capital S self in that way. And I think spiritually speaking, if God really does dwell in us by his Holy Spirit, in his Holy Spirit, in each one of us, then in each one of us, as St. Teresa of Avila says, has a piece of heaven in us, and that's where God delights to be. And I've really been trying to think more about that. And that's what kind of is on the forefront of my mind a lot in this book. And so my hope is to get more conversations in that direction. I'm not saying, hey, let's let go of doctrine by any means. There's doctrine in the book, but that it's much bigger and much more beautiful than our confessions of faith say. They can't say a lot about who God is. They can't really show us love and empathy. And boy, did I learn that even through like something like the Book of Church Order.
Yeah.
So I am hoping to have different kinds of conversations started and just a richer spiritual growth in them. And there is this fear, though, like, writing such a vulnerable book and then publishing it, it's already vulnerable to publish at all. But to do something so personal and vulnerable, I think at this stage of my writing, I'm kind of like, I don't like the hustle of marketing when the book comes out, at all. And having seen behind the curtain of evangelical Christianity, I'm not trying to build anything else as a writer. This is like kind of the book that is just like, this is where I've arrived. Yeah. And maybe this is the last thing I write. I don't know. Like, this is what really matters to me right now. And I'm happy with that. So I hope that, others will find it to be beautiful, but who knows?
An early impression for me, as I reflect on this book, is I don't get a sense that you're out to prove anything.
Yeah.
I don't get a sense that you're out to like make a big point. So many books and so many publishing things are all about like, well, what's your short, like, give me your summary, give me your précis, give me your whatever it is. And it's like, I don't get this. And I don't mean this in a bad way at all. I mean it in a really lovely way of this is just like, let me share with you the work that I've done. And hopefully it provokes something in you to do some work too. Yeah.
And like, you have to come to some sort of like elevator pitch for proposing the book, for marketing the book. And mine was that it's Saving Face is a reflection on the divine face and the meaning we get from the faces of others as we are trying to find our own. And that's a mouthful, but I do want people to think more deeply about what does it mean in the blessing, the greatest blessing that God has Aaron give is that, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. What in the world does that mean? Like, that is what I'm getting at in this book, I think. And I open up talking about one of my favorite novels, which is C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces, which was one thing that really provoked me to write this book as well. And I read it in my early 20s, and I was, it sparked something in me that I really couldn't begin to understand more until I got older and read it again in my 40s. And, this book is a retelling of Cupid and Psyche, and Orwell, Psyche's sister, the whole time is putting together this book of her complaint against the gods, and she's so self-righteous, and she really thinks she's figured it out, love and friendship and even like benevolent ruling, of her people, and, all the things that God has withheld from her. And you get to the end of the book, and she's having this vision at the end of her life where she is stripped naked before the gods, holding only this journal of complaints. Finally, she's, face to face and can share her complaints before the gods. And all of a sudden, like, her book seems really small, and it looks like a bunch of angry scribble. And she starts to read it, and she just keeps going on. And they cut her off after a while and say, "Do you have your answer?" And at that point, she realizes that she's been reading the same thing over and over and over again. It's like that Jack Nicholson movie, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, over and over and over and over again. And she realized she did have her answer, that she didn't even have a face yet. She's like, how can we bring our complaints before the gods and expect an answer till we have faces?
Yeah.
And, that's chilling. To think to get to the end of your life.
Yeah. Well, and that's just the prelude to the book, first of all.
Yeah.
And it caught me off guard in a really great way that to recognize how often do I do this? And how often do we do this in this space of deconstruction or spiritual abuse survivors or people who have gone through something in their life that we've been collecting this journal and this book of complaints against the people who have done these things to us, or our self-righteousness, or I standing on this thing, or not recognizing I'm bringing my entire old system with me. It's just going to be presented in a different way.
Yes.
And we just want a place to vent all of it out. Until we realize, like you're saying, it's just a bunch of angry scribbles and I'm standing here naked and I have no idea what I actually have or what I'm trying to say. And for the judge to say just enough and to have the answer, and just to say the complaint was the answer. To have heard myself making it was to be answered. And this idea of, like you said, how can we meet face to face until we have faces? And to have this invitation into that work to say, okay, yes, I hear you. And what? Now what? Right now what? And I think this is the work that I've been trying to do for the last, 3 years, is ask, okay, I have definitions for what I've been through. I've heard enough other people's stories to be validated and not feel crazy or not feel alone. But now what?
Right.
And I feel like this book is saying, well, the now what is the work. Like, where do you want to go from here? Do you want to stay in that place? Do you want to continue to stand around naked, not knowing what you look like?
Yeah.
Or do you want to be invited to come actually see your face and therefore to see the faces of others and the face of God?
It's amazing that we can't see our own face.
Yeah.
That we come into the world looking for a face, delighting in our face. And because we so long for that. And yet we can't know who we are until we see it drawn out, beckoned out of us, in the faces of others.
Yeah.
And to think that, that's our ultimate longing too, is for, God's face in Christ to delight in us, to see that delighting in us. And that we are called to do that for one another is holy work. It's holy work, is to help one another find our faces, to hold that mirror up and to share and what it is about you that I see. But not only that, to awaken you with my own face, to awaken you to welcome the other in all my otherness.
Yeah. I love that. Well, and I love that you tell the story of the woman at the well, and we talk about reflections and mirrors and halls of mirrors, or the basin at the tent of meeting and all these things.
Yeah.
But Jesus, how he's drawing this story out of her so she can learn that although she's like that woman, passed from husband to husband, such that her own body, which is to represent sacred space, has been defiled, and she has no real husband now. Jesus is the faithful husband and high priest, and he gives her dignity. And I love that line of all the things you could have done with that woman or with that woman's story, or for any of us and our stories, to be able to have our own dignity reflected back at us.
Yes.
Versus all the shame and all the things that we carry with us. I mean, gosh, how differently would we live if we felt like someone saw us and received us with dignity?
I know. That's such a good question. And I think even my own reactions, throughout the day with my husband, my children who are young adults now, but still pretty needy, but really easy. We can rob them of their dignity in our annoyance, our avoidance, or these different things. And so small daily interactions are all invitations for that kind of thing. And when we harm somebody else's dignity, it's an assault to their holiness. And it's like philosopher Emmanuel Levinas talks about how the naked face, getting behind the countenance that we put on to see somebody's naked face. And in that, they are so vulnerable then, because he says that we can liquidate them completely.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And so he answers this big philosophical question, is it righteous to be? And his answer is yes, because my face provokes in you the commandment, thou shalt not kill. It awakens you. But, I would say, well, the other side of that is that my face provokes the commandment to love God with all your heart, and with all your soul and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's really what I think the book is about too, is just this practice of starting to see differently and have these encounters throughout the day.
It is. Well, and you talk about, first of all, I usually get my next to be read lists usually come from footnotes of all the other books that I'm reading. Back to the sources, like, oh, this sounds like a really good something. So Emmanuel's books are now on my list. But you talk at the end as well about, like you say, we need barefaced leaders, right?
Yes.
To look past the masked stories to see the naked face. What do you think that looks like? How do we do that for ourselves, or how do we invite the people around us to do that?
Well, even in my own experience, of the leaders that wanted to, quote unquote, help me in my church through it, and even a lot of friends. And we do this all the time ourselves. It's like we come alongside, kind of, and we start telling them, we start giving them like, well, this is how I see it. This is what needs to happen, and we start like teaching in a way and therapizing people, things like this. But we're not just simply being with, that witness in their suffering, and actually saying, how are you? Like, how do you feel right now? How can I help you? But also saying, like someone just said to me the other day, I was pretty devastated over something, and someone was like, well, you should be pissed. And I was like, especially being a woman, like, you're not supposed to say you're angry ever.
Right.
And a Christian woman. And I was like, yeah, I'm pretty devastated. No. You should be pissed. Aren't you pissed? I would be pissed. I'm pissed actually for you, on behalf of you, and I just think that was a way of seeing me at that moment, and being honest with the actual feelings that I'm not even admitting that I'm feeling,
Yeah.
And I think it's just like seeing my humanness. And we're so quick to call people sinners and then say, this is how you repair it, but we don't actually take a survey of, okay, I do have anger right now. What information is that giving me? That doesn't give me a right to sin, but what information does that give me right now? Why am I angry? How do I feel that in my body? Those kind of things. And I think that's how we can move forward together better. Yeah. And so I would think like barefaced leaders, there's such a hierarchy in so many churches to where I don't even think that there is a relationship between laity and leaders so much. And I don't think it's good for the leaders either. They're put in some category that they'll never really be able to live up to in holiness. So I do believe that every believer ministry is really important.
Well, I think you say somewhere in the book, talking about those reflections, like even when we look in a mirror, it's not really our face because we're seeing it backwards. We're not seeing ourselves the way other people see us.
Yeah.
And so to hear that you have that kind of a connection with someone who can see you and reflect yourself back to you, it's like, no, you're not devastated. You're pissed.
Yes.
And to give you that gift of language to say, thank you for the permission to admit that. And to see myself
we need to
clearly.
be able to name things because, and it's the same thing like when we're like doing that memory work and the story work, to be able to name our emotions in that. And like you were saying before, okay, this happened and it was really painful, but my desires were really good. You know, what I wanted from my mom or my dad, you know, was a good thing, you know, and I want to bless that.
Yeah.
Instead of make this vow with myself that I will never feel that again, you know, or, you know, the ways that we try to move past things to protect ourselves, which are coping mechanisms that we all have. But to be able to go back and, you know, it actually rewires in our brain. To be able to retell our stories in these ways is physiologically healing us.
Yes.
And to be able to have a witness to that is even better. So to have friends to where you could do this kind of work with, and it really does rewire that way that memory is stored in our minds. And we can say, you know, I bless that 14-year-old girl who was looking out the window and her mom was really late, you know, and you could feel her leaving. Before, I didn't like that girl as much. I thought she was very self-righteous, you know, and all these other things. But to bless the things that she was looking for and wanted, that those are good. And I still want those things. So I think it's really important.
So often we're in this position to look back at our 14-year-old selves, our 8-year-old selves, our 20-year-old selves. And instead of blessing, we approach them with such shame or even contempt. It's like, what were you thinking? Like, why did you do that? Or that was so dumb, or what a letdown. And we make these vows for our adult selves, like, well, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to feel that again. I'm not going to relationships, whatever it is. And so to go backwards, and I think it's Adam Young who talks about like, it's in our deepest shame that we often find the greatest freedom if we're willing to face it and mine it, right? To go back to that 8-year-old self. It's like, of course you went back. Of course you waited at the window. What you wanted was connection with your parent. What you wanted was them to delight in you. What you wanted for these things. So can you go backwards? And instead of shame or distance or contempt, can you bless that desire and say, that was a good thing to want, and find a different way to tell that story. And I love that you do that.
Thanks.
And there's this sentence, I don't remember where, it's every encounter begins with a benediction.
Yes.
And you quote Emmanuel Levinas, like welcoming a face with a benediction is contained in the word bonjour, right? Here I am, I'm glad to see you. It prioritizes the other person, but first, you have to really see them.
Yes.
And then you say, it's good that you are other and your strangeness is due only to my own. And I love that kind of work. I don't know if you're familiar with Janai Alman. She has a book titled Othered, and it's all about this kind of work. It's like, we need other, and we need to avoid othering the people who are outside of our circle or outside of our doctrine or belief or political, you know, and this kind of stuff, and how much harm is done when we other people. Tell us more about the encounters that begin with benediction, because it was a beautiful section.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, we go to church and we leave with that benediction, right? And I read you a benediction from Numbers 24 through 26. But yeah, Emmanuel Levinas talks about how each encounter begins with a benediction. And that's what we're beckoned to do. And when we do that, bonjour, when we, even in our face, because I think we can read people's faces more than the words that they're saying, right? They could say a benediction and we can see in their face and body language that they're just being polite, but they really feel differently, or, you know, they want to get on with their lives or whatever it is. But with our face as well and our whole countenance, when we say, I am glad that you are here right now, it's not just me pronouncing a blessing on that person, which feels so good for that person, you know, and makes a connection for both of us. It's actually joining in with God. We are joining God in saying, I am glad that you are here right now. And so that's holy work. And I just think that's so fabulous. And what we ultimately are longing for is that benediction face to face with God. for his face to shine upon us, for his face to say, I am glad you are here, for us to see and know finally that he's been here all along and that we've missed him over and over and over again. And so like, really, this book is a hunting for that. And benedictions are such a great way for us to participate in that, and such a great way to love one another. Who doesn't long for that? Who doesn't long for people to be glad that they exist, to be glad that they're there in their presence right now, to be delighted in? We want that so badly for ourselves. And yet we put on those masks, or we rush through our day and we think that these other things are important. But when somebody really takes the time, we remember that person, we might, those people make impacts on our lives. And, you remember those people from your childhood too, who really made you feel like they were glad to be in your presence.
Yeah.
And we're really curious about you. And so you're beckoning that. That's what our faces do. I mean, God could have downloaded all the information about him and his love in the beginning of our life, right? And so we would know everything. And so that we would practice goodness all the time, that we would, already be heavenized. And yet, here we are stumbling about. And I think that this is a big part of it. It's the hunting for the realness of him that's already here now. And that heaven isn't just like somewhere you go to, but that we actually are practicing heaven now.
Yeah.
And we're beckoning out our eternal selves.
Are you familiar with The Critical Journey?
I am not.
By Hagberg and Gulich. I'm just learning about it. I'm finishing the book now. It's 20 or 30 years old. It's been around, but I saw like 3 or 4 different people post about it in the span of a week. And I thought, this is coming across me for a reason. So I should read it. And it's this idea, it talks about the stages of faith and this whole journey that we take. And they outline 6 different stages. And the first one is just kind of the sense of awe. It's like, oh, there's something other than me.
Yeah.
And I feel very small in this very large world. And stage 2 is this sense of, I need to learn as much as I can now. So I will attach myself to a teacher or a leader or a book or a mentor or a guru, whatever it is, and just absorb as much as I can. In stage 3, we get really productive. Now I need to serve. Now I need to do something and prove myself and have worth and all these things. And most people in our churches live the rest of their lives in stage 2 or 3, right? At stage 4, we've had some kind of inciting incident, death, grief, loss, burnout, something that causes us to take that inward journey, or the journey inward, I think they call it. And then eventually you hit the wall. And there's no going around, over or under. You just have to get through it. And then you come out on stage 5 with this journey outward, which is like, now I have this new sense of self and understanding of God, because at the wall, it's our will faces God's will. Ooh. And who's going to win, right?
Okay.
And it's like you're saying, it's that reflection to each other.
Oh,
and
man.
you finally face God, and it's like, okay, what are we going to do here? And where are we going to land? And stage 5 comes out looking a lot like stage 2 or 3 without any of the attachments.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then to stage 6 is this life of love. And I hear so much of that work happening in your book. And there's this one section that completely caught me off guard. You talk about walking past the mirror when you were pregnant with your third child.
Yes.
And you're like, I stopped cold, and talking about your relationship with your mom and all these other things. And you're asking these questions like, can I really do this?
Yeah.
And then breaking it to the girl in the mirror, feigning responsible motherhood. No, you cannot. You are allowed to be exhausted. Stop the charade. You didn't come from where she came from. You can't really know. You are running a fool's errand. Figure out you. And figuring myself out is taking a lot longer than I expected. And I was just like, that's the work. It's like we walk past the mirror, and one of these days we suddenly catch ourselves trying to pretend to be something that we have no idea how to be. And I'm wondering, now that this book is out soon for the world, or getting out there slowly, and as you continue to do, because this is going to be an active work for you for a long time, for all of us.
Yes.
What do you hope is reflected for you in a year, 5 years, 10 years? Like, who are you hoping to look like, that's other than needing to prove yourself? Because again, I don't think this book says to me like you're trying to prove something or be someone. Just like, this is just me trying to do my work and sharing the process with the rest of you as an invitation for you to do it too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, that's what I'm really praying about and thinking about and journaling about and talking my friends' ears off about right now is that. Because, there's still so much life to be lived, right? And there's been such reevaluation for me in how I want to do that, and what matters. And even like what church looks like and all these things. So a couple years down the road, I'm kind of excited to see. I end the book, talking about the mature face, and I've learned that a huge part of maturity is a big fat I don't know.
Yeah, sure is.
It's a big fat. It's like my husband and I right now. Like our house is on the market, and so every time someone wants to do a showing, we have to do a lot of last minute cleaning because even though we are keeping the house clean, you need to make sure the carpets look freshly vacuumed and the dog snots off the windows and all this stuff, right? But we keep saying like, the more we clean the house, the more that we see like the problems that are with it, And I think that's like our souls too. So to let go of some of that striving is hard though, because you still want people to see you a certain way. And, that's a constant thing. And so, even recently, my husband and I are in a dinner club with some of our dearest married friends. And one of them went through a divorce and he's now engaged. But he's been with us all along. And we are starting to know each other really well. And so we see how the dynamics of one another's marriages are. And, these are the people we'll talk to if you're going through something. But to get more personal again, like my husband said something that really upset me the last time we had dinner together in front of all my friends. And, we had to work through that. But I also have to be okay with, and I was kind of happy that it happened in front of them because they love us. They love us both, So it was just interesting for us to work through it with witnesses and to say like, not to act like I'm okay. I wasn't okay at the moment, so that kind of transparency, you can't do that with everyone.
Sure.
But what I want are more relationships like that. And that's where I want to invest in that for younger people as well. So I'm taking a couple graduate level classes in counseling right now. And let me tell you, the people in this class are like my daughter's age. And one girl comes running up to me after class and, this beautiful 24-year-old, and she goes, "How are you so vulnerable in class? Like, I wish I could be like that. I'm so anxious to share anything." And, she's saying all this and I'm like, well, I was called the great whore of Babylon online. My kids read that about me,
Yeah.
You get to a point where I don't have a huge investment in what these 24-year-olds, are judging me as.
Yeah.
And so my huge investment is just being real and encouraging them to do that as well. And so it's kind of neat because I found myself in a neat relationship with these younger students. And it can be a humbling experience going back to school at this age.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's a good kind of humbling. And so like, that's what I really want more and more of is that.
I think, so much of our community and our audience is made up of survivors.
Yes.
Of spiritual abuse. And it often feels much less like standing barefaced or having a naked face than it does having it stripped for us.
Yes.
And given the response of the presbytery to you and all those meetings that you were through, and like you're saying, all these things that have been written about you, the way that your face was masked or unmasked or stripped or seen or unseen, what have you found helpful to discover and find your own face again?
Well, one was this wrestling with God, really a wall of sorts of it's a hard balancing act between what you let go of and what you like want to defend yourself. You want to defend your reputation, especially like publicly. And it affected my vocation as a writer and an author and a speaker. It affected like I said, my kids are seeing this stuff being said about their mother online. My friends see it. It affected my witness. I felt like with all my unbelieving friends, for them to see that. What kind of Christ are you following? That these people behave like this. And, unbelievers know how immature and awful and cruel it was. so I had this like real wrestling with God about where that line is, because reputation is a good thing. You should want a good reputation. There's proverbs about that in scripture and things. However, I had to come to this point where I'm like, it's not the most important thing, though. And I can't control the whole story about what people think about me, what people say about me, and what people believe about me. The only thing that I can truly hope for is, this hope that God really knows me in Christ, and that more than I know myself,
Yeah.
and that's the me that I want to pull out. That's the me that I want to discover and nourish and grow in. And so I had to kind of say and work through this in my journaling and things, just like, okay, I'm going to do what I need to do in this church process. I'm going to write about some of the public things that are happening, record some of the public things to set that straight. But I'm not going to get into a lot of the personal stuff with people, and I'm not going after these people. I'm just going to have to be okay with what everybody decides to think about me. And, I think that was a big moment for me that was pivotal in your question there. Yeah. Was just that kind of wrestling to say, okay, I know I'm not these things that they are saying, but what is there more? Because some things that I thought I was were also kind of falling off of me, off of my face, healing, And so I think the picture on the cover of the book is of this face that kind of has a hole in the whole face. And you see a kind of sunset in a paper doll cutout woman in there, and trying to discover what's inside.
Yeah.
And I just think that picture communicates it so well of what I want and what I think God is calling us to.
Thank you so much, Aimee. Everyone will get a copy. Saving Face, Finding Myself, God, and One Another Outside a Defaced Church. Thank you so much for your time. I loved this conversation.
Me too. Thanks for your just reading the book through and engaging with it so well.
What a great conversation. I love the amount of vulnerability and the work that Aimee was sharing with us and inviting us into. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, be sure to follow Aimee and say thanks for being on the show. You can find links and all the things in the show notes. As a 501c3 nonprofit, our work is made possible by our generous donors. If this has been helpful to you, consider joining us today at brokentobeloved.org/support. Coming up on the show, we have David Rubelid, Jeff Chu, Hillary McBride, and lots more. Subscribe or follow the show to get new episodes automatically. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review or share with your friends. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.